I'm really delighted to introduce the family panel that's comprised of Pat Wright, Judy Murray at the other end, Bunny Rodriguez, and Rebecca Jaynes. And I met Pat at the ISPS-International conference in 2015, where she organized the first family panel ever. And she has been organizing family panels at both the US and the international conferences each year since. She is the parent of a son who does experience psychosis, and you'll learn more about her story as we continue. Rebecca Jaynes, whom I don't know, but I'm going to read her bio. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor with nearly 20 years of experience working with families and children with serious mental health conditions, and almost half of whom have been in early psychosis. And I think I'll let you continue so that I'm going to keep the introduction short so that you all can have more time to talk. There's more time for Q&A. Bunny Rodriguez is a family member and a departure from years past. She is the daughter of two parents who experienced psychosis and other extreme experiences. And she will speak from the perspective of being a child and having learned tremendous resourcefulness and resilience through her mostly loving but sometimes very challenged parents. And Judy Murray is the mother of a son who a few years ago took his own life because of his struggles, and she will share her story as well. So each of the panelists will speak for 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Good morning. Thank you, Claire. You have the calmest voice. I was feeling a little nervous, and then now I'm just feeling like it's all going to work out. Thank you. Thank you. You'd be good for meditation tapes. Well, a little bit of background. I am really grateful to be here this morning. This is coming to these conferences, it's like my tribe, my people, not that we all think alike, but I just feel so comfortable here. I did meet somebody from where I'm from, Minneapolis, yesterday, and that was delightful. We might be, following up afterwards. My son was first hospitalized in 2009. He was being evaluated for drugs and mostly cannabis. So that's how I came into the field. Most people that are here have been doing training and worked very hard, and it's this epitome of success to be able to present your work and whatnot. And being a family member, it's a little different. I kind of was oriented into being here because of my son. Obviously, it was my choice to be here, but it's a little bit different kind of a talk. Not only do I have a son that experiences extreme states, and he just was released from the hospital after 10 weeks last week. And that was, I think, his 12th hospitalization in 10 years. So that kind of qualifies me to know a little bit about what it's like. I also grew up with a sister who was diagnosed with, this was in the 70s and 80s, so the paranoid schizophrenic diagnosis. She was medicated. She had to be on every medication. She was hospitalized a lot. So when we were told that my son had psychosis, my immediate reactions were, oh my God, we have to make sure he's not over-medicated, and there has to be other ways besides hospital and medication. which is how I got to ISPS in 2012. Went to my first conference in Chicago, and right away knew I needed to find my family members, my people, and talk to Karen about, okay, how are we going to create community for family members? And she said, well, everything's already, planned. It was, like the month before or something. But we can have, like an informal luncheon. And so we did that. And I knew, okay, this is so helpful for me, and got that feedback for other people. So we've been continuing to work this kind of work for family members. It's my sanity. And it's been so fun to catch up with people that have become friends over time, and to meet new people as well. I think what else influenced this experience that I've been having with my son over the last several years is I was diagnosed with Crohn's. I don't know if people know what that is, but it's a digestive disease. And I had my life was threatened a couple times because of that, and so steroids was helpful, surgery also. And so, but I didn't want to stay on the meds because I had been blessed into this agency that was starting in the early 90s, right before I got sick, that offered alternative healings, body work, Reiki, all kinds of modes of healing that were not, especially at that time, accepted necessarily by the medical community. So I did that fight, struggle since the early 90s. So, 15, 16 years later when my son was diagnosed, I was really motivated to find the same for him. Although, of course, because it was my son's life and not mine, that's the dance, I think, that is, one of the biggest challenges for family members, particularly parents, when we are, in the mode of being parent for all of these years, that we're supposed to know, like, what our kids need, and then to realize, okay, so he's out of control, or seemingly out of control to me, living in my home, and yet he gets to decide, needs to decide, however you want to look at that, how he's going to live his life. I'm fortunate that we've always been pretty close and had good communication. So even though there were times where I did call the police, and then, came and heard how traumatizing that was, and thought, well, I'm not going to do that again. And then a situation would happen, and I would just be, crying my eyes out, because I just didn't feel like there were other options. And it was, okay, so I knew that was going to be a really difficult thing to have the police come to the house. And, one time they had to put handcuffs on him. I thought, well, he's not a criminal. And on the other side of it, he hadn't been eating. He had taken off. We didn't know where he was for days. And there just weren't good options. So I've had a lot of desperate situations with him, wondering, if he was going to survive. Fortunately, he has not voiced being suicidal to me, and that's just a blessing, because my sister would tell my mom that she was going to kill herself, and it was very painful, obviously. My career background is I've worked as a parent educator, so with parents for a long, long time. And so it was delightful to hear Larry Davidson this morning talk about the little kids' books, because that's a really simplistic way to understand things for me. Sometimes when I can get into brain fog and just the cycles of stress and whatnot. So let's see if I can figure out how to get us to the next slide. Yay, this is only my second PowerPoint, so I just have to put this out there. So family stress. Thank you. Aspects of the illness trajectory. This is mostly for me to stay on track, but also I think it's kind of interesting to read something when a person's up there, but I don't have very many pictures. That'll be next year. So I think one of the difficult parts of the illness trajectory is the unpredictability, which is also the bottom one, sustained uncertainty. The role strain. So initially, many of us are, the counselors, the drivers, oftentimes, our loved ones can't drive anymore, the social workers, the nurses, trying to figure out, what our role is, if any, in the medication piece. If they've been growing up in our house and we've been parent, but typically the onset is 18 to 22, so then they're becoming adults. So how do we help them become adults when on some days, life, for my son, he couldn't get out of bed for a period of months. So fortunately, we had an ACT team that came in, and they were really instrumental in being able to go up to his bedroom and talk to him. And I think what's really been a saving grace for me is having been trained as a disability advocacy person for a lot of years. Then I knew that good people were out there, and if I could help my son find them, because obviously, he was going to be working with them and there needed to be a mutuality. And fortunately, it only took a couple years and that came to be. So just to finish up, we heard about financial stressors yesterday from our speaker, Ann Harper. And of course, the time constraints and energy demands, getting to all appointments. Usually, families are busy anyway, and then we have, some extra things going on. The psychosocial stressors. I was talking to my daughter last week. We were in the car going somewhere, and I was telling her, my son, he had just was getting out of the hospital and going to an IRTS, an intensive residential, like a rehab. And she said, well, what's he going to do next? And this is, going to be a couple months down the road. And she's had the same job for 15 years and, been married, they bought a house. Her life, she's just a couple years older than him, looks so different than his life. And he doesn't know, we don't know, where he's going to be day to day sometimes. So it just struck me how, as a sibling, she really, has a different perspective on life. And I'm just getting the warning, and now I'm sorry, we didn't get to practice this beforehand. So here are some coping strategies that I'll just kind of breeze over very quickly. So assuring effective communications with healthcare providers. And I think the match is so important. And like I was mentioning, it took us a couple years, but we did get there, and my son loves talking to the counselor that's been with him, fortunately, for several years. I also want to mention, as family members, there's so much stress that happens that we know about. But even putting together the panel, we had another mom, who was going to be here and tell her story. She's writing a book about psychosis in her family. And she was living in California, but her son had been struggling for years, so she ended up bringing him back to England about a month ago. Maybe she can be at a future panel. And then you'll hear some more challenges that some of us are going through. I wanted to be sure to talk about, I just skipped over it. Okay, well, we'll go here. Could somebody, oh, here, this is what I wanted. Okay, we're going to skip over the paternalist and empathic attitudes and cover them as we go through the stages of families. And I think we can go through these stages at different times. And for me, I know, like in this recent hospitalization with my son, and I wish I could tell you more about him. He was a skateboarder, a snowboarder. All the kids liked him at school, never had any issues about teachers and whatnot. He was in gifted programs, had friends, played all the sports. And I don't want it just to be about him, particularly the talk we just heard, as being defined by his illness. Stages of the families. Different stages. The first couple of years, I think I lived in the vulnerability, like I didn't know what was going on. I was trying to figure out what was going on. And I somewhat went into being compliant, although that didn't last very long because that's not my personality. Have become an advocate, purposefully making and using relationships to obtain resources. And an activist, like here I am. And what I've realized over time is how I can, like this recent hospitalization, as I was starting to say, I started out with the vulnerability about, and I wish I could tell you more about like how he got there and whatnot, but we're limited in time here. But I could, this last couple months, I've been going through all of these more, kind of gradually. So I can be in different places at the same time in different areas. One of the crucial things that happened, which was a turning point that I want to leave you with, is my son was upset about being in the hospital. He went voluntarily, and then they did commitment because he wanted to leave. And he was there, and I would visit him and whatnot. Actually, I was at the international conference in the beginning of all that. That was kind of difficult. But nonetheless, he was upset. And one day, I spontaneously went to visit him. And because I was in the neighborhood, I had some appointments, and they were good about saying, okay, fine, come, even though it wasn't visiting hours. We have to give people some credit here. It's not all one-sided. And they said, oh, but he's having an EKG. And, the doctors are in there talking to him, and I thought, EKG? I've had 3 siblings in the last 2 years have major heart stuff, including a brother that died of a heart attack last winter. So I was alarmed. And I went in, and my son was coming down the hall and said, I'm really upset. They wanted to do an EKG, and I didn't want to have that happen, so I refused. And I said, well, good. And I said, should we see if we can have a meeting with the doctors? And he said, yeah. So we got a couple of the doctors and the social worker, and we sat down, and the doctor, one of them, started looking at me and saying, well, I can tell you about the side effects of the medication. And I said, well, I think we need to listen to Gabe because he's upset, and after all, it's his deal. He's here. You're the one that supposedly is listening to him and helping him. And my son, who's not a big talker, but I think had reached his bottom, and maybe having a advocating mom played a little bit of role in it, but proceeded to say, you come into my room every morning in this group, it's a teaching hospital, and start asking me how I am, and then I tell you I'm upset, and you don't listen. And you ask me what are my side effects. And then my son decides to shut down because, they're not listening to him. And then I could see how they're quiet, he said, because they're trying to think, well, what medication is going to get him to talk? And I thought, this is so ridiculous. Really, if they could just listen to him and then he would feel connected to them, it would be a totally different scenario. So I know my time is winding up here, but needless to say, amazingly, and my son was in tears. I was nearly in tears. I was just trying to hold it together so I could hold the space for him. But what ended up happening is somehow, after that meeting, he got better. And the social worker said, yeah, maybe it was like a catharsis. And I thought, well, he finally was heard. Like, how simple is that? So I continue to learn and am grateful that there are places and pockets where, people do listen and there is hope. So I'll just leave you with these key principles. I got this out of a textbook, here. And that last thing I want to say about safety. So safety, and I think these are great principles: safety, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, cultural, historical, and gender issues. Kind of all the things we've been talking about since yesterday. So this is the book is Meeting Children's Psychosocial Needs Across the Healthcare Continuum. And there's my contact information. And thank you so much. I'm going to move on so that we have time for your questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I am going to read from script. I apologize, but I tend to ramble on when I don't have a lot of time and go over my limits. So I apologize for that. I was guided, I'm Judy Murray, by the way. I was guided to ISPS several years ago, shortly following the suicide of my son, Dan. I'm really grateful to be a part of and have access to this amazing group of folks who have found resilience through their own struggles and are now fighting for system change so that others are given an improved opportunity for a profitable and fulfilling life. It is through connection where we find hope and strength, and that's where I found mine, but my son was not so fortunate. My family grappled with our Western medical model for psychiatry, paying the ultimate price. Dan ended his life just 2 weeks after discharge from the psychiatric hospital. His identity and his soulful self was replaced with diagnostic mental disorder, and he was immediately started on very powerful suppressive drugs as an attempt to rid him of the voices and his unusual behavior and beliefs. Using this approach, symptoms are not addressed and source is undetermined. This is when he lost any remaining dignity that he may have had, as he was denied the space to share his experiences while his own voice was silenced, as Pat just said. This is very common, and they go unheard. He was isolated rather than given the liberty to talk about his different perceptions, losing the opportunity to explore and interpret his experience of voices, which are often not to be taken literally, but are metaphors as messengers for direction and healing. They often represent the contents of the innermost space of our minds that can lead to growth and transformation when not pathologized and concealed. The knowledge that I have gained and share with you today has transpired since my son's death. And as a family member on this panel, I feel it significant to mention that my role as his mother could have been more supportive, Had I done my research and not placed so much faith in a system where symptom reduction is the first line of defense, sometimes the only line of defense. This approach denies one the opportunity to explore their experiences. We are taught, especially in the Western world, to fear those who are different. And I can tell you firsthand that fear is paralyzing and destructive. Fear moves us to judge others, stripping them of their true identity by creating conceptual identities for them, and they now become who we say they are. The fear of what I didn't understand was sensed by my son, leaving him no safe space to bear himself and to share his truth, either in his social network or within our mental health system. He was now a fragmented sense of self, losing his place in society and in the world. So we all come from the same mold, and that is where we will all return. I believe our lesson here is to treat one another with support and love as we each move through our individual and very diverse journeys, manifesting in sometimes unconventional perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors. The shift from fear to non-resistance of the unknown will provide the communal space that is necessary for one to be heard. Also, by realizing we are not responsible for providing all the answers is extremely liberating. I have learned a lot since Dan's death. And I understand we all have different viewpoints and beliefs, and I respect that. The following is my perspective after endless research and correlation to my memories of Dan's experiences as I moved through this journey with him, minute to minute, day to day. So those who hear voices in their head are not so different than those who we refer to as being normal. We all experience a voice or many voices in our head in the form of involuntary thoughts that habitually invade our mind as we move through our daily routines. The chatter plays over and over and over like a recorder as we shower, prepare for the day, take a walk, drive the car, watch a show, and even when we are in conversation with someone else, our thoughts are on what our next response will be. Being present can quiet our minds for a few moments, only to return to aimless thought when that now moment is over. These inner thoughts or voices often creep up from the past, related to our conditioned minds, with memories of pain and trauma, or fear of an imagined future which most likely will never even materialize. Some folks may hear voices audibly and others through thought. Some may respond to the voices aloud, while others respond silently in their mind. These thoughts or voices are often unpleasant, to say the least, as they are the ego's defense mechanism and encourages us to judge ourselves and others, to fear, to criticize, to hate, and to envy. So I ask you, who is normal and who is not? There are many ways to view and understand reality. When we surrender to the discomfort of the unknown and not having all the answers, a space is created where all views are recognized, even when they are not in alignment with our own. Whether the source is of trauma or spiritual, we can work together, exploring and interpreting the experience and what it means to that individual while they become the agency in the creation of their own healing and growth. I will be presenting a breakout session later, and I'll share more on my family's struggles through the system and strategies that we can use to connect with others who are struggling with unusual perceptions. I'm also going to describe the often misunderstood process of spiritual emergency, and that's what my son was going through, or attempting to go through. I will share how we can guide someone safely through this transformational event, safely by not pathologizing the process. And that's it. Thank you.
Hi there, good morning. I'm Bunny Rodriguez. I'm from Connecticut here. Thank you all for coming. So like Claire had mentioned earlier, I am a child of two parents that have experienced psychosis. Also, they have experienced many mental health challenges throughout my life. Just to give you age difference, I'm 38, and my parents had me when they were 19 and 20, so very young parents. I do have a sister who's 360 days older than me, and she actually lived with my father's family, so it was me alone with my parents. I grew up in housing development, so I lived in poverty. I ate at local soup kitchens. I walked for miles and miles carrying food from food banks. My parents were very resourceful. My mom would always try to get clothes from women's centers, and my dad was always the one to guide the family, make sure that my mom was well enough to be a mom to me. Early childhood memories are my father just taking me fishing and walking all around town. We did not have a vehicle. And my mom was in and out of the hospital often for mental health challenges that she had. She did not prefer to take her medication because it did not make her feel like how she wanted to be. But at times it would become very unsafe for her. We didn't want her walking, my dad didn't want her walking into traffic or, walking up to people that would take advantage of her. She has lots of trauma. She's been taken advantage of many times. I've heard about that growing up, and then also in the recent years helping my mom with placement and things and experienced that. A child should have to hear things that are happening to a parent, but unfortunately I did. I now do work as a social worker. It took me 10 years to graduate with my master's. I definitely have to say my community is what helped me mold my identity, going to church, being an acolyte, being a lay reader, going to the local library. My first job was working in a local library as a page. So I've been working since 15, and I've had many different jobs. I've worked with children with autism and Asperger's. I now work in mental health substance use. I created a group for parents that have small children that are in recovery or not from substance use, and help model effective parenting, or just having a peer that I'm also a mother with two children. I have a 5 and 8-year-old, and just modeling a safe place on having sort of like, not a coffee club, but like a social club, having parents that can meet with other parents that are in treatment, and having small children and raising them. Because many times people say, I don't feel safe going to the play group, or I don't feel safe going over here because they don't get me. So I create that safe place for them. I've been doing that for the last 2 years within the agency that I work in. So my mom and dad are very different, and they always flip-flopped years. So there could be a year where my dad was always taking care of me and also taking care of my mother, and then there was years where there was transition when my dad was heavy into drinking and doing other illicit substance use. And I've seen my father have seizures before. I've seen my mom run down the street naked, just not herself, and I've seen all those things, but what always grounded me was just a strong sense of identity. I knew that I was a well-loved child. My parents were always home. They always made sure that I was engaged in activities in the local area. Anytime there was a free event to bring your children and, get a free gift if you do this, or come to this play group, or do this, I was there. So I have to say I have a strong sense of identity with the community, and so, it's as if I did have parents, but then my friends' parents were also there for me, bringing me to band camp, bringing me to activities at school, things like that. My parents were very private and personal, so they always had the lights off, they always had the shades down. I understood that it was for safety. There was a lot of things happening in my community, in my neighborhood, that I was not aware about actually until years later talking to old neighbors. And my parents kept me sheltered in that sense of some things that were happening. It's like I knew these things were happening, but not really. I also was a victim of bullying. I was the only Caucasian person in my neighborhood. So it was difficult for me because I was different. But I really adapted to many of the cultures that were in the community, primarily families that would bring meals. So I was able to eat a lot of soul food and eat a lot of food of rice and beans from families that were from Puerto Rico. So I ultimately winded up sort of identifying with a new culture growing up because I wasn't sure what mine was because we were very closed off. I didn't really know like what my parents' culture was and what kind of tradition things. So I've been with my husband for 18 years, and his mom's from Puerto Rico and dad is from Spain, so I'm very well versed with the Puerto Rican culture, and that's kind of been my identity that I've taken because they've been so warming to me. Their culture and their traditions have been amazing. My mother-in-law has been a wonderful mentor to me. Her name is Maria. She's from New Haven, and she was a social worker too. And just really into the community. And she's a lovely person that really took on the space of helping parent me further. So I've been with my husband since I was 18. So they've been a wonderful family that took me in so that I can go to college. I lived with them. They're a very strict religious family, but they took me in. So I'm really appreciative of that. Like I said, that my sister grew up with other families. So I didn't have anybody to help me. I was a parentified child. I did know that my mom was experiencing, different things that were not what other kids were experiencing, but it was always just, she'll get through it, and we'll get through it. And it was my dad coaching me through the way. And honestly, probably when I started my graduate studies program at Southern in New Haven, it was going to school was kind of like therapy for me, but then it was trauma because then I'm learning about things that I was like, oh, that's what you call this that I experienced. Oh my gosh, like I felt like I was good with myself and the things that happened, but then learning there's a name to it and this is what it's called was really traumatizing to me, but learning all the different skills and things, especially, meditating and mindfulness, I was able to do that. I really, my father has always been the one to kind of, help my mom and kind of guide us. And I did not know that my dad had experienced any extreme states prior to 5 years ago where he was first hospitalized and he was walking up the street in town in the middle of the night, and the police had picked him up and brought him to the hospital, which I really appreciate that because they knew him and they're like, oh, this person usually isn't out. This is not typical. My dad got to that point because of overcaring for my mother, who had a lot of outbursts and lots of safety concerns, running out of the house and running away often. So for the past 8 years, my dad's been in recovery since my 8-year-old was born. I have an 8 and a 5-year-old. And he's been really into reading the Bible and just walking miles and miles every single day in his neighborhood. Everybody knows him in the community. He spends time taking the bus to go see my mom. My mom's in a nursing home. And he did all those things and pushed himself. So it was a little sad that they've been separated. They've been married for 39 years. The last 2 years have been really difficult. My mom's been in ICU several times. My children have been wonderful, understanding, developmentally what's happening and what they understand. They have a great relationship with my parents. So when I work in the field, I'm very compassionate, very, humanistic. I'm always trying to learn from others, teach others, be a mentor, receive information from other mentors. I'm really in a sharing kind of process everywhere I go, personally and in my work. And I enjoy people. I like their story. I like to share my story, so a lot of the consumers that I do work with are familiar with my background and what I've done. And I think that's most of the things that I wanted to say. And then currently, my father, who's been my rock with helping care for my mother, my parents were supposed to transition soon into moving. And if you're from Connecticut, you might know that my dad has been missing for 30 days. He's a very organized person, very meticulous, pays all his bills, talks to a lot of people. And he went on a journey that he started walking a day after he went to the hospital to receive services. He preferred to meditate, watch Jimmy Swagger ministries, listen to gospel music all day long, and just walk and walk and walk, and see his wife and take her out for walks every morning. But we went to the hospital. He's been having headaches, not feeling too well, kind of not eating well. We've been concerned. And they released him. And then the day after, I talked to him again, and he was like, Bunny, yeah, go check your mother. She's not in her nursing home. She's not there. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's there. And he's like, okay, well, I'm at the hospital. I'm like, why are you here? Because you told me to. I'm like, oh, I didn't tell you to go to the hospital. And then he says, well, I'm eating in the cafeteria. I'm like, oh, that's good. I'm really happy you're eating something. I know you've been walking too much and overexerting. I'm really worried for you. And we talk and text every day, my father and I. He's like, well, I don't need to eat if I'm not hungry. And I'm like, all right, well, I hope you go back to your apartment soon. He's like, all right. So I'm telling you about this current state in transition to this because I'm the last person that talked to my father before he went missing. His apartment is showing signs that he was coming back. His vitamins were ready, his coat, his other Bible, the TV is on with the Christian music playing. Bills are all ready to get paid. And so he walked from Middletown to New Haven. So he walked for 13 hours day and night. And he did wind up in somebody's home that he broke into that looked like a home that we used to live in for 35 years. And he was in the refrigerator looking in and just very confused, blank stare. And the wonderful family, went to go engage him. He just broke into their home at 4:30 in the morning, not from that town. And he was just looking, and he was probably starving, and then his book bag was on the table as if he lived there. So I'm thinking he's working on, muscle memory, like, hey, I'm walking this way. He walked past my work. He was walking to his mother's house and stopped at a house that looked like his old one. And he wanted to pray, and had his book bag on the table, and they prayed, and then he left. And so the only way that I know that he met with this beautiful family was that I've been advocating on the TV. I have a wonderful company that has put billboards out. I've been meeting with other advocates, and I've just been, trying really hard to find him because, he's on this journey. Definitely he felt as if the world was ending and that he was out to save souls. And this kind of thought process made him a beautiful person. It makes him a beautiful person because he just wanted to go out there and help. And I was talking to Judy the other day about this, and I feel like you said it best. He was on a hero mission. He was out there to sacrifice himself, be a hero. And, the story, I'm very happy that I was able to get to see video of my dad, of all the places that he's been to. I'm very happy that he got to enter into a beautiful home of a wonderful family. It's a challenging situation. I'm trying to keep myself grounded, and I'm happy for all the things that I learned from the community, and now I've been reaching out and meeting so many people. So I'm just sharing this story because I was really excited to come here and share everything with you, and then I had this recent turn of events that's just wow. But I have no guilt because I always made sure I participated with my family and participated with people that I needed to reach out to, and I'm very grateful and thankful for that. And that is my story. Thank you.
Rebecca's going to come up and tell us about a program that does multifamily programming, which is really exciting. The international community is really talking more about involving family members, and this is one way of doing it where not we don't have to retrain everybody because it's not currently a part of a lot of training. So, okay, thanks, Rebecca. And thanks so much, Bunny. And there might be, if anybody sees or hears about your dad, contact the New Haven police.
If you're in Connecticut, or if you're in another state, because you don't know where he could have possibly went, but if you're in Connecticut, we have asked people primarily to first call the local police that you've seen him in that town that you're in, and then second, then to call the detective. That's really important. There are some flyers out front over at the sign-in desk if you're interested to make copies or bring that. His name is Peter Recchia. Yes. You know, I wanted to do that. I even have like a police person calling me now, so I haven't been able to think about getting things done, but I would have loved to shown a photo, but like I said, his name is Peter Recchia, and if you Google it, you'll see a picture. I've really been out there trying to spread the word, and thank you so much.
And if you want to talk more, lunch is after this session, and some of us will be going to lunch, so just come on up, and that might be an opportunity too if you're looking for more information. Thank you.
I'm so moved from what you just shared, Bunny. Thank you for that. Thank you, Judy, for what you shared as well. My name is Rebecca Jaynes, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Portland, Maine, and as Pat said, I do work with early psychosis programs, so I come from that frame of reference. I have other frames of reference as well. I also identify as a family member, and my brother, who at age 26 died young, only to his knowledge of why and what was going on, but he was a pedestrian struck by a train. And whether it was suicide, whether it was an accident, whether it was recklessness based on his substance use and untreated mental health issues, we won't ever know. But that certainly was a formative part in my development. So I wanted to share that. But today, I speak to you as a mental health counselor, and a mental health counselor who has put my career entirely in the world of early psychosis and the young people that I'm working with and their family members, because that is where, by and large, I have found the most hope, the most excitement in this field, the most change, and frankly, it just activates and passions me. So I'm learning all the time. And this is the one conference, this is my 4th time coming to an ISPS conference. I sort of randomly stumbled into it in New York in 2015 and met Pat there. And it's where I learn the most as a human being all year round, in addition to the work that I do. As a professional, it's where I learn the most. So thank you, everyone who's here, and anyone who has conversations with me. Thank you for pushing my boundaries, helping me understand more completely my own biases, where I fall short, where I am strong, all of that. So thank you, and please find me on any break. So I represent the PEER program and the PEER Training Institute. My mentor is Dr. McFarlane, and he was one of the forerunners in the multifamily group movement that was a brand new and shocking idea in the 80s, I think I can say, and from the people I've spoken to who were around in the 80s and were in the early stages of that. It has progressed. Much of it is the same, and it has and continues to progress and change. And I want to say my experience of the multifamily group model, which I can describe more, is that literally it's a social construction model that is the building blocks for social change. And what it is we get together with family members, we get together with young people. I'm working with young people often clinically, individually, outside of it, so we're doing CBT for psychosis and helping to really understand a further, more inclusive experience that they're going through, whether and however they define it, so working with them closely on that. And then we're building a narrative in these groups, and we're building a narrative that involves family members inherently and involves themselves. And by family members, I mean family members and support people. So I work with people ages 16-ish to 25-ish, I also do consult with states across the US who are trying to implement multifamily groups in their programs as well. So programs that go up to age 35. And I always want to say, power to the people who are doing these programs in the older age set. Because I have the privilege and the opportunity to work within the coordinated specialty care grant funding of early psychosis, which is what allows us to have this thrust forward in this work. And so I acknowledge that privilege that I have built in. That allows me to come to places like this and speak and learn. So my colleagues and those who I'm most interested in are those who find a way to make multifamily groups happen when they have no money, when they are strapped on a daily basis, when they're trying to make ends meet, and working with families who are desperate to learn more and be part of it, like Bunny described, like Judy described. When I look back, I was 25 when my brother died, and I knew very little about him. I only knew as his sibling, he was 26, a year older than me, I only knew how difficult he was to live with. I mean, really, that's what I knew on a daily basis. He did not pick up his dishes. He did not communicate. The world revolved around him. He was strange. Like he was a brilliant mathematician, and he made his income playing Texas Hold'em. For any poker fans out there, he was a huge poker fan. He would play online poker, more than one game happening at one time, often through the night, and he made bank, much more than me as a social worker or a mental health clinician. But he led this life that was on the outside of traditional society, and frankly, I found him very difficult to live with. That's the only thing that comes to mind. So when he died, I started learning more and more about him and thinking about him differently. And again, as I mentioned, I'll never know whether it was suicide or an accident or his recklessness or untreated mental health issues. But I do know this. I talk to family members on a daily basis, and because within these multifamily groups that I run and within the type of program that I lead, and I love that Larry Davidson said this about early psychosis programs, we are the future in this field, and there's a wide variety as I consult with different states and counties on implementation of involving families. There's a wide variety of what the coordinated specialty care teams look like and how they involve families. So I would say the peer program is on the forefront of really prioritizing that. There's two things that we prioritize in the peer program that I think make us unique and I think make me proud to say I'm part of where I am. One is that we start with families from the get-go and from the support people that are in people's lives from the get-go. And the second is that we've used our funding creatively from the coordinated specialty care model to prioritize the full integration of a peer support specialist. And not every program has done that. 75% of the programs out there now have peer support specialists. How crucial and integrated they are to the team varies widely. So what we've said to do, and this does not come because we're genius or brilliant. I mean, we may be. But the reality was we made lots of mistakes along the way, but we prioritized it. We tried partnering with another peer agency who were phenomenal in what they did, but we found this inflexibility and challenge of our models not finding common ground. So we kept looking. We got consultation. We got the legendary Pat Deegan to come consult with us and help us understand what are we doing wrong, where did we make mistakes? And she, lo and behold, helped us realize that our biases were getting in the way, equally as much as the peer support biases were getting in the way. So anyhow, long story short, one of the things I'm enthusiastic about is our integration of Sarah Sierlich, who's our peer support specialist. She's going to be presenting this afternoon at 2:30 in a breakout session. So watch for her and and we made a video together that we're really proud of, sharing people's experiences and stories with the peer integration. So as I close, I want to think about am I okay on time? Am I good? Am I good? Okay. As I close, I want to talk about some of the families that I've met and let their stories really emphasize and shine what we do in this program and where our stance comes from. But actually, as I'm thinking about that, before I do that, I want to think about more broadly my experience as a trainer and consultant in different states and talk about those places, because my sense is, and I might be way off base, but just in conversations I've had with people who are here, there's a fair amount of folks with lived experience, and woot woot, yes, thank you, be present, be loud, and help us understand as the Edwinas in our group. And there's also a lot of individual practitioners who've worked with folks with what would be described as chronic mental health issues for some time. Is the sense that I get that is a growing and building family practitioner involvement, but my sense is, am I missing anyone in the room? I must be missing a lot of people, interested parties. Anyhow, please, I hear you, I see you, come talk to me in the break if I've forgotten you. But in terms of, I want to talk about how you make this work, how you make multifamily groups work outside of having this massive amount of funding that we get through the early psychosis. One is a story, I'll start in Portland, Maine, because that's our personal story. We have a program who is a sister program, resilience program, and they're open to age 30, up until age 35. That's based on their funding criteria, out of their control. But they did push the envelope to get there. Is that a 5 minute? Okay. And they have no specialized funding at all, but they made it an emphasis just to do the groups in the evening. So they don't have the full multidisciplinary team that comes with coordinated specialty care, but they do have the groups. And no, you're not gonna make a lot of money running groups, but yes, you will change a lot of lives. That's Portland. Portland, Maine's resilience program, and that comes only through the diehard efforts of Vanessa Davey, who is the social worker within a base standard of care program, who made it happen. The next example I have is in South Carolina. I'm just starting to work with them now, but it's a private mental health agency, the Beckman. Is anyone from South Carolina area? They cover 7 counties in South Carolina. It's a private for-profit agency, I believe, funded in part from this county. I haven't figured that out yet. But what I do know is they also don't have any money to make this happen or making it a priority. So it's a matter of divesting and diverging money to other areas and prioritizing it from the get-go. So I get to puzzle out with them how to make it work in South Carolina. Third story of success of where you'd find multifamily group where you might not expect it is anyone from Massachusetts here? Yes! Hello. Okay, so I'm working with MapNet, which is the Massachusetts, I don't know what it stands for, but I'm working with them. And Advocates is a program in Cambridge, I think, Cambridge Health? Framingham, thank you. I'm working on my geography here. So Advocates is an open dialogue program. Some of you, Marty is familiar with it. Thank you, Marty. I love them. I'm just getting to know them. They are an open dialogue program who's learning to build on the narrative elements of a multifamily group and problem-solving approach within open dialogue. And I'm so excited to do it with them because I'm the multifamily side of it. So that's another puzzle we're figuring out, but they're prioritizing it. They're saying we're trying to figure out how to hold multiple perspectives, how to use the parts of your model that we can, and I'm saying, how can I learn more about the parts of your model? So it doesn't get in the way, it opens up bridges and opportunities. The last piece I want to touch on is the cultural competency piece as well. I'm working with a couple different counties in California. I know there's one Californian here because we ran into each other last night, Chelsea. Hi, Chelsea, wherever you are. This is Contra Costa County in California. First Hope program, they're amazing. And they have clearly a strong bilingual, bicultural community there, bilingual, bicultural workers working there. And they build in, their multifamily groups are astonishingly successful because of this sense of self within that community that is beyond the self that Larry Davidson said earlier today, and that was referenced in the back of the room. Okay, we do pizza in our groups, very boring, very bland, pizza and salad. They have these amazing potlucks at there, and in Contra Costa, I'm like, can you invite me over for the potluck? I'll be there to observe your group for fidelity, but really I just want the potluck. And they hold themselves far beyond any facilitator facilitating it. They stay connected to each other. And such power in those rooms where would be an alternatively invisible population, particularly with psychosis and with mental health issues. So I think I should stop talking. And we will open it up for questions. Would you like to speak again, Pat, before we do that? Yes? No? Yes? Okay. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was wonderful.